Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review the Winchesters. So, this, of course, is an episode that is to give us like an Indiana Jones slash Scooby-Doo feel. And so, it seems that the CW was to sink in more money into this show than Supernatural ever did. Because, of course, we go on and we have some CGI stuff in the opening sequence, a monster that we don't quite know what exactly that is. I'm assuming it's probably what could be a Krita is. I don't know. Let me know if somebody knows exactly what the name of that monster was, because I have no clue. But beyond that, we also have a monster in a suit in this episode, so that tells us, like, this show has way more money for the pilot episode than what they had done prior. And so, in all honesty, for me, going on and watching Supernatural, after season 8 of Supernatural, I was to go on and watch that show much more casually than I would want to admit. Like, I had watched like certain episodes, but I could kind of give or take, especially when they really added in the whole Men of Letters thing. That's oftentimes when they just lost me. And so, hilariously enough, the Winchesters picks up where Supernatural leaves off, and I'm like, of course it does. Because, again, we have a whole story that is catered around the Men of Letters with our new characters. And so if you didn't like the tail end of Supernatural, you probably won't like this show. Because, of course, this episode anyways is straight up awful. And I did not like this episode whatsoever. And because I was like, why couldn't this show be more like season 1 of Supernatural? Instead of going on and being like the picking up where we left off garbage that I'm like, I don't care for Men of Letters. Like, I hated that story. But hey, we're stuck with it because this episode just really focuses on that so heavily. So let's tee it up and tell you what this episode is about, regardless of if people were to like this or to hate this. So, for this episode, we go on and we have a character named John who is coming back from the war. And so I'm like, okay, so we're just going to probably get like a whole entire episode that just has John off with his war buddies, I'm assuming, in one entire episode. And so, but anyways, we have John who is coming back home from war to re-meet up with his mother Millie, to then turn around and want to find out more about his father, who had just left him this note in this unusual key that has this anti-possession charm upon it. So John then is to go on and take this letter to the letter, and while doing that, it seems that John is to bump into a girl named Mary, who is at this theater watching Deliverance. And so we have these two characters who seem to be going on the exact same path as one another, because if we didn't already had the early season of Supernatural going on and finding a father, now in the Winchesters show, we have to find two. Because we also have it to where Mary is also trying to search for her father, who is Samuel Campo, who, through IMDb, is to tell us that this is going to be Tom Welling at some point. Probably not this first episode, but Tom Welling is going to be on the show. The guy who is Clark Kent on Smallville and is also currently doing a show with Brendan Fraser. And so like he's also going to be on the show for who knows how many episodes to probably get killed during whatever episode he's on. But hey, like it'll be interesting to see if it'll be how long he'll be on the show for. So that's cool. It's the only thing that really interests me about like okay, like I can just get through this garbage to at some point wait for Tom Welling to just be on the show. But not only that, we do have a supernatural tie to the Winchester show. If we don't have someone who is to go on and start narrating this episode, we are to also to have a tie in to the supernatural show, which I think will just try and smoothly transition into the supernatural season 1 story, is what I'm naturally assuming is going on for this show, because I don't think it's going to go on and really be like a 15-season show. Because, in all honesty, with the way that this first episode went out, I was like, God, this... wow. What kind of just copying and pasting? Like, Indiana Jones, Scooby-Doo, even a little bit of Ghostbusters, a little bit. And I will, at some point when I'm talking about the episode, will reveal why. So, this first episode was just awful for me. I don't like the Men of Letters story, but we're stuck with this garbage. It's just a thing that has to consistently become a thing in our lives. So, with that said, I think I'm just going to go on and just go into spoilers. Like, there really is, like, not much for me to want to go on and state further past what I've already said. They end up meeting up with a number of characters. We have Adam Monroe, who I believe might have been in the original Supernatural show at some point, where John is going on and talking to her at some point in the Supernatural show when they actually showcase him. We also are to roll in new characters like Carlos and Lakita, however you want to pronounce that, because I know that they don't pronounce that the exact same way that I'm pronouncing it. Because I don't think the K is actually, so it's like Lakia. Anyways, and it seems when Carlos is to be like a veteran guy who grabs John and is kind of forcing him to like get a crash course. We have Lakita, who is to be like a rookie for her to go on and try and be like, if anyone was to go on and watch like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like I think Lakita is to basically be like the Willow of this story. She's to be like the book cracking girl, is who I think they're gonna make her out to be, like the Velma of the group, where she has to be like the smart girl who has to thumb through books to figure out stuff that neither Mary or John can't. We also go on in this episode, and not only is there lost fathers in this episode, we also have Mary, who has her own story that I'm sure will get revealed at some point about her cousin named Maggie, because we end up having to keep talking about that throughout this episode. So, with that said, let's just go on and let's get into that double 5-time territory. I'm going to go on and immediately spoil the supernatural connection in the spoiler territory, because of course we immediately have in this episode a narration going on that is done by a certain supernatural member. So I'm going to go on and spoil right away who that is. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time. It's when spoil this episode. Just really, just I don't know what it is. I'm getting tongue tied today, so that's great. So this episode is to be taking place in 1972. And in the beginning of this episode, we come to find out to have Dean, who is narrating the beginning of this, or Jensen Ackles, who, of course, is to be the creator of the show. So this is basically young Sheldon all over again. They're going with the young Sheldon approach to this show. But here's the thing. We also have Dean, who shows up by the end of this episode, and is to say that he doesn't really understand what's going along, as well as the prequel characters are. And really, Dean is going on and trying to put the pieces together because, of course, I'm sure, like, how he is to go on and look is to how he is to go on and look like he did in the first season of Supernatural. And so, going on, I think that's what they're really trying to do here, is to connect the two shows together at some point. So, we see Dean actually going into the car, driving off, so on and so forth. So, but we don't also get the Supernatural car, the Impala, being used in this episode. So it's like, okay, so we're building to that, I guess. So this, of course, is in 1972. And so John is to have gone on this bus to get home after the war. And so he is getting flashbacks from the war that he had just gone and fought. And so John then comes home and is to make his way to Winchester's garage to then bump into Mary, who had just gone on and seen Deliverance. Mary's purse is to fall over, and so John is to spot that this girl has some treats of sorts, and he is seeing that she has licorice drops, and he's like, man, like, I haven't had something like this in about 2 years. And Mary's like, well, hey, you go on and take it free of charge. So we have John asking Mary if the movie Deliverance that she saw was any good. What a weird question. And so Mary goes on and states that it's like the book is better. I'm like, well, of course it always is, because that's what everyone every time goes on and says for the most point. So we go on and just have John and Mary go their separate ways. So John goes on and meets with his mother, Millie, and the first interaction is like, hey, this place looks like a dump. And Millie goes on and tells John, it's like, well, that's what happens when my husband and my son leave me. And then they start hugging it out. John goes on to crack open a beer, and John is to state that he's legal now. And Millie is just like, well, considering you went into the military illegally by forging your father's signature, like, I'm going to go on and take this beer away from you. So we have John, we have Millie just kind of talking it out. So after it seems that John has spent some time with Millie, we then go on and have John, who has finally read this letter that he had gotten from his father Henry. After John was to get out of the military, Henry had sent him this letter, and so Henry reads the letter to go to this address, which will lead him to this alley that is to have this massive pool in it, because that'll come into bizarrish need. So John is to have this key and this letter, and so come to find out, all of a sudden this demon ends up popping out of nowhere with these black eyes. And so he's like, hey, I'm going to take that key from you, And so John is like, no. So all of a sudden we have Mary who comes into fray and starts to beat up this demon. And John tries to help Mary and ends up getting her punched or him punched because of them both fighting the same demon together. And so Mary is telling John to stop helping because he's only getting himself more beat up, or her beat up. So we have Mary who takes this demon and chucks it into this pool, and we all of a sudden have this demon that is going on and talking about Maggie and a number of her family members that are all burning in hell. And so we go on to have Mary, who is now reciting in Latin the phrase that pays, that can go on and get a possessed demon from out of a person's body. So after that, we go on and we have John, who's like, wait a minute, like, what was that? Like, who is that? What's going on? I have no clue. So Mary has to go on and state that this guy was a demon, and that the reason why he was burning up in this water is because this water was blessed. I'm like, oh, okay, so they're using like the holy water angle. And so we now have Mary asking why John is here. And so he's like, well, I got this letter from my dad after I was to get out of the service, and so he had this key. So Mary and John go on to find a Men of Letters headquarters that we had Mary, who had a spray can, and come to find out we know why. Because, of course, Mary was to spray a demon trap symbol so that way any person who wasn't welcome there would accidentally be stuck there, so Mary can dispatch them later. So John ends up opening this door, going into this headquarters that is very uh, dusty and disheveled, like no one has been there in years. So, more than likely telling us that possibly everyone had been wiped out by something. More than likely, maybe it was Abaddon or some other goofy thing that might be a flashback from prior episodes. So, of Supernatural, because I feel like we're going to be doing that a lot in this thing. It's going to be like Quantum Leap all over again. So we have John, we have Mary that make it into this headquarters, and comes to find out John is to see a locker that has the initials of his father and has a lock on it, and he ends up going and putting in his birthday, and he ends up opening it, seeing his dad's things. So John takes every bit of his father's things to then at some point give them all to Millie, and John is to tell Millie like what is all going on at some point. So, but let's back up a little. So, John and Mary are going through all of this stuff, trying to figure things out, and we go on to also have the reason why John wasn't possessed by that demon is because with the key that he had also had an anti-possession charm on it, like Mary has. So it's like, wait a minute, so they're not going with the tattoo route, because I guess these kids aren't old enough to get one, so they're now just doing a charm so that way they can merchandise this out. Because I'm sure they're going to merchandise this out of the show. Believe me, they already did that with Supernatural. Now it's time to figure out a way how they can merchandise this show. So we go on to have Mary, who looks up this file and is to not understand what this file really means, but what Mary is going to go on and do is just hand off this file to, of course, Latica, and figure it all out. So that's great. So, because we'll talk about that more. But we have both John and we have both Mary that are stating that Samuel had gone on to meet with some woman named Ada Monroe. And come to find out, this girl is to live in Lubbock, Texas. So, come to find out, when you kind of Google Lubbock, Texas, it ends up saying the word Monroe. So, I'm wondering where they got the last name for this character. So, it's the first thing you Google. So, we go on to, of course, then turn around and have both uh, John and Mary, who seek out, uh, of course, Latica, or Vladica, and so they end up giving her this file to try to figure out and decipher, as well as her kind of going on with them on what they're going to go on and do next. So we go on to have Latica, who's to ask, it's like, well, hey, like, Carlos is in town, you want to, like, have him help you guys? And we have Mary, who goes on to say to Latica, it's like, well, like, I still can't forgive him for Tupelo, so no, like, what happened in Mississippi. So, like, I'm definitely not going to go on and ask for his help to figure out this case. So, we have both Mary and John, who are driving along, trying to make it to Ada Monroe, and so we have John that is talking about Merv, his brother in arms, his guy that he was in the military with, and so, because again, John is having these war flashbacks in the car. So, all of a sudden, while we have this flashback, we have John, who is trying to protect Merv, and Merv, it seems, is to accidentally stumble upon this mine, and then so Merv is looking back at John, realizing he's going to have to move at some point, and kablooey, Merv is dead. So, we all of a sudden have Merv, who's in the back seat of John's car, asking for John's help. And so Mary is to realize that John has just seen a ghost, and so Mary is to ask John what is wrong with him. And so John is to state that that he feels that there is some like something haunting him. So we have Mary that goes on and is to give John this EMF meter, and John ends up turning it on and nothing moves. So Mary states that it's like, well, obviously, if an EMF meter is telling us there is no ghost here, then there is no ghost. So, like, you can have that be a peace of mind for you, even though that just makes you, John, come off as a crazy person rather than something really going on with you. So, come to find out, we have John, who also mentions that he, of course, is to have Merv's silver cross necklace stuck in his arm, because I guess the shrapnel, or whatever you want to call it, of Merv's body was to land into John's arm, which of course was this necklace. So by the time that both John and Mary make it to Monroe's store, They immediately end up smelling sulfur, and I don't remember if ever they really played that up in the other Supernatural show, but I guess sulfur is to go on and be the sign of a demon, because it's the demon's BO, body odor. So, they know that a demon, of course, is coming. So, we then go on and have both John and Mary, who are to fight this demon, and it is to really just have this demon like, hey, I'm here again. So we, of course, go on and have John and Mary who fight this demon yet again. And so Carlos is to drive up with Latica, and so Carlos is to once this demon is down, Carlos is to sprinkle salt all around it and is to grab John to say it's like, okay, you're gonna get a crash course on kind of exorcisms. So Carlos goes on and throws at John this menu and tells him to read it. So John is like, are you serious? And Carlos is like, yeah. So we all of a sudden have John who starts reading this menu about this certain burger, and Carlos is like, oh no, I'm sorry, like that burger is divine, but no, just read just read the Latin part. So John starts reading the Latin part, and all of a sudden the demon ends up getting out of the body by having the gray smoke appear. So after it seems some time has passed and they're trying to find Monroe, it seems that instead, uh, Latika, man, if they couldn't have gone on and had some name that is hard to pronounce. She, of course, is to figure out what all that meant by them having this file. And so she realizes that it's all about rooms and that it's to lead to some monster trap that of course Samuel was looking for. So it seems that this file is to possibly lead them to New Orleans. So now we gotta go on and drive even more and have another road trip here. So we have this road trip, and so we have Latika and Latia, and we have Mary that is going on and talking about Latia's backstory and how, of course, she had met Samuel and that she was wrapped up in that Maggie story. And so it feels like Latia is to owe it to Mary to kind of help her out with whatever she needs. And so we also have, of course, John in the back of this van, because Scooby-Doo. We have John that is talking to Carlos, and so Carlos is mentioning that how he got started in hunting was he was to go after a ghoul who went and killed off all of his parents. And so they go on and talk about a hunter and how, like, how he is to start into this business and how, like, a hunter's life will probably end. So stating that, like, either one will probably be the worst of how they get into it and how they end their lives, because a lot of time it'll probably end brutal. So, excuse me. So they go on and they make it to this graveyard. And so if the beginning sequence of this episode was to have Samuel, who is going on and basically looking like Indiana Jones, making his way to this this graveyard where he is going on and trying to open up this Men of Letters sigil with his own blood. And that ends up opening up a monster that could possibly be the Akrita, because I'm not sure what this monster was. It was some CGI looking monster that we barely briefly saw, and I'm assuming it's the Akita, but this thing, like, the CGI was so horrible that I couldn't really tell what it was. So that's great. So, and plus also, nobody has information on it within now X number of days since this episode has released. So, we then go on and have John and Mary, Carlos, and Lakita, who are all walking in this graveyard. And so we state that John, this is the second time he's been in a graveyard because, of course, he had spent some time with Merv's mom. And so that also has Mary talk about her family and that they ended up giving her a knife before she could even know what it was. And that also we end up finding out that Maggie is Mary's cousin. So we go on into here, and they find this place with this big Men of Letters sigil in this kind of like well of a thing. And so they open this up, and come to find out, they figure out that the whole thing they're looking for is this monster trap. So we have John and we have Mary that goes down this kind of well-like thing, being roped down. We have them go on and use this torch to like drop down so they can kind of see, they can have some kind of light down there. Lakita ends up stating that it's like, well, hey, like, why do they have like an underground graveyard and above ground like, this makes no sense. Why is there an underground thing in a graveyard? So when John and Mary are to go down into this hole, it seems that they find out that this thing is guarded by a Lugaroo or a Loopgaroo. So I'm probably saying the first time around it sounded like a Lugaroo. It sounded like I said that correctly. Said that. So, because they start to hear this growling, and so we go on and we have John, who's to tell Mary, it's like, well, I'm hoping that's just you making that sound. Maybe it's your stomach, because of course John was to have gone on and eaten those licorice dips, or those licorice candies, and Mary was wanting just to go to the theater just to get that candy, and so she asks in the early part of the episode if John still has any. He's like, nope, I ate that in all in one sitting. And so Mary making the statement of like, man after my own stomach. So they're facing off against a Lugaroo, and I'm like thinking in my brain, like, was there ever a Supernatural episode that a Lugaroo was there? Because I feel like this name sounds familiar. I didn't go into like the back history of all the Supernatural episodes because there's freaking like what 13 seasons of them, whatever. Like there's so many seasons that it's like, how can you go on and remember if something was already used in the show? Unless it's like, oh yeah, like it definitely is to have stood out to me. But so we have both John and Mary who's running around. And so while that's going on, we also have Monroe, who's a demon who ends up showing up where both Ladia and Carlos are. And so when she ends up going on and showing up, Ladia is to find out that this is to be a monster trap. So we have to forcibly go on and have Monroe take out Carlos. And so now Laddie has to kind of figure out how to like phone password finger unlock this monster trap so that way the demon will get sucked into this thing. And so Monroe ends up coming out to be normal. When we went on and we had John and we had Carlos, who went on to unpossess that one woman. There was the one joke where Carlos makes where it's like, well, yeah, like she'll probably wake up with no memory or maybe broken leg, but she'll be fine, yeah. We don't have to worry about her. Like she's unpossessed now, like that's the worst of her problems. We so we have John and Mary. So Mary ends up going back into the rope while John is still running around having this Lugaroo follow him. And because Mary is to mention that they need to go on and get a blade, like a silver blade, to cut the head off of this thing. And so unfortunately Carlos just has that in his van. So we have Mary that goes on and gets the blade, and so while Mary is going on with dealing all the Carlos and the Latica stuff, we have John who is now running around having this blade drop down, and he is trying to siphon it through this water. He grabs the blade just in time to slice the head of this Lugaroo, and the Lugaroo ends up going on and having his head one place and the rest of his body another. We also had Carlos, who was to have read the kind of the thing that had the Men of Letters symbol, and he realized that one of the symbols stood out, and that of course was the symbol of the Lugaroo, and he's like, oh my god, there's a Lugaroo down there. So yeah, like they figured it out, they put the pieces together. So by the time that they figure out all the stuff with Monroe, we then have John who climbs back up, is like, you guys won't believe what I just did. So we then transition to have John going back to Millie with all of Henry's stuff. And so John ends up going on to realize that maybe this was the thing that he was meant to do. Saving people, hunting things. You know, the family business, of course, the one line that they didn't deliver. And so, with all of John's training, he thinks that this is what he's supposed to do. This is what he's meant to do. And Millie goes on, is like, okay, all right, like, I guess, like father, like son kind of thing. So we, of course, now go on and have Monroe, who is back in the Men of Letters headquarters. And so Monroe is to go on and state to the Scooby Gang here that it seems that there is to be a new threat that is rocking the streets called the Akrita. And I'm like, Akrita? Akrita? What is it, the band? With arms wide open? Is that what's wreaking havoc on the town? The Akrita! This name sounds so stupid. Like, it feels like they made it up. But whatever, it's probably a legitimate thing. So, we have Monroe who's talking about the Akrita. What a goofy name. And so, she's talking about that's the new threat. That, of course, is to be the one thing that has possibly come from another dimension or another realm or something. And so, that, of course, is to be the thing that they are going to go on and try to fight here for this season. And so they come to find out that they have to go on and road trip again to Savannah. And so Mary is going on and saying like, all right, well, I'm going to go to Savannah then. And John is like, well, you're not going without me. And so that tells us that both of them are going to be an item. If we didn't have that moment where John was talking to Lakita, and when it seems that Lakita was getting nervous, John was to kind of grab Lakita's hand and be like, well, hey, like, I'm nervous too, and how about we go on and be nervous together? And Mary's looking at John as like, oh, I thought he was going to be mine. And then, uh, but it still seems like John is still like wanting to go with Mary because it's all going to lead to them being in love and having babies. Because we need to go on and do something that, of course, is to be leading up to the pilot episode of Supernatural. So with that said, I think that covers most of this first episode, and I realize that this is right around the time where this episode is to end. So I'm going to get the heck out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything that I forgot about. I know there was stuff that I was re-tying in because I forgot about it, or really I was just like, God, there's too much freaking cover in this first episode. I'm waiting for a cool down episode probably coming next week. That'll probably just be a stretching episode. Or something that at least is a lot more fun. So with that said, I'm just gonna go on and get out of here. Because what I mentioned was like by the end of the episode, we end up seeing Dean, and he is to mention that he doesn't really know what all is going on, but he's gonna write everything down and narrate to us. So like that ends being like the end of the episode, which I've already stated at some part of this already. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.